Hello and welcome to the next part of our course. In previous section we have covered the very basics of JavaScript language, which I hope you have really enjoyed. And now it's time to move on and learn things that will take your JavaScript knowledge from basic level to an intermediate one. In this section you're going to go deeper and learn how to deal with functions. You will learn about what kind of non-primitive data types exist in JavaScript. You will introduce to this stuff like arrays, objects. Besides that, we will learn about several types of loops and we'll see how they work. Also, we will cover and introduce to date object and its built-in methods. After all of this stuff, you will be able to build your very first JavaScript application, which will be a digital clock. At the end of the course, again, you can test your knowledge with another more interesting and a bit complicated coding task. Also, you will be able to do the quiz. So in this section, our journey will become much more interesting because we're going to be covering a bit more complex things than previously, and also we'll meet more and more interesting and complicated coding examples. So it's time to move on.
It's time to refer to another very important aspect in JavaScript, which is called functions. Because of that, this section is about from basics to intermediate JavaScript. We will discuss what the functions just are and how they work. But in coming sections, you will see how they act in advanced JavaScript. Sometimes you may need to write some code and then repeat this code over and over again. This is the case when we use functions. They allow us to minimize the amount of our code, and they are very flexible to use. Let's see what the functions really are. Functions let you group a series of statements together to perform a specific task. So as we said, if different parts of a script repeat the same task, you can reuse the function rather than repeat the same set of statements. Alright. In order to create the function, we need to write keyword function, followed by the function name. That name should describe the task function is performing. Then we have to place parentheses, in which we can pass parameters. We use parameters when functions need to be provided with information in order to achieve a given task. The steps that the function needs to do in order to perform this task are written in a code block inside the curly braces. The code block consists of one or more statements, and you do not write the semicolon after the closing curly brace like you do it after the usual statements. Alright. Let's write something inside the code block. Console.log hello world. Reload the page, and you see that we have nothing here. So the statements in the function are not always executed when the page loads. In order to do that, you need to call, or in other words, invoke the function. It's very simple to do, you just need to write function name with parentheses. So we've got here hello world in console. Alright, now write a bit more complex example. Suppose that person is passing an exam and trying to enroll in university or at least in college. For that, the person needs to get the proper score. So write the function and call it passExam. I'm going to use here two parameters, name of the student and score. Then imagine that in order to pass in university, it's required to get at least 71 points. So create new variable, call it passUni, and assign to it the value 71. And after that, create another variable which will be lower limit for passing an exam in college. Write variable pass call equals to 51. Okay. Now we are going to use if statement. We are already familiar with that. At first, let's check if the person could enroll in university. So write if score is greater than or equal to passUni. Then run in console. Place your name parameter plus has enrolled in university with, and here we need score, then plus points. So if this condition is false, which means that he or she has got lower score than the limit in university was required, then we need to use else if statement, which will check if person could enroll in college. So write else if, and the condition score is greater than or equal to pass call. Then inside the curly braces, write console.log, then copy it from if statement and just change university into college. And the next possible case is to fail. For that, let's use else statement and then running console name plus has failed. Alright, function is ready, but as we said, in order to execute all those codes, we need to call it. So write the name of the function, pass exam, and pass here the relevant arguments. Write John as the name of the student and score 75. Reload the page, and you see that we have here John has enrolled in university with 75 points. That's the power of functions. For every next student, you don't need to write this code again. You just need to call this function over and over again and just change the arguments. So let's do it. Write pass exam, then place here as the name Mary and as score 65. Then do the same again and pass here arguments as Bob and then 45. Reload, and we have the proper results. John has enrolled in university with 75 points. Mary has enrolled in college with 65 points. And Bob has failed. Alright, you may notice that sometimes I set parameters and then arguments. So let me explain what is the difference between them. When the function was declared, you saw the words name and score used. These words act in the same way as variables, so they are called parameters. But when the function was called, we specified real names and actual scores of the students that were used to get the results. These values are called arguments. Make sense? So those are parameters and those are arguments. Alright. Suppose that score consists of quiz score and essay score points. We can create the function which will calculate the total score. Write function and call it calculate score. Then insert here two parameters for quiz score and for essay score. Then inside code block create the variable score, which equals to quiz score plus essay score. So in order to get the score value, we need to use special keyword return. The return statement stops the execution of a function and returns the value from that function. In this case, we want to get score value, therefore we have to write return score. Now let's call this function as the argument inside the passExam function and set the arguments for that function, for example, as 40 for quiz score and 30 for essay score. So this function will calculate score value and return it as an argument for passExam function. Reload the page, and you see John has enrolled in college with 70 points. 70 is the sum of 30 and 40, which are the arguments of the calculateScore function. Make sense? Okay. So in this lecture we have discussed what the functions are in JavaScript, how they work, and what are they used for. Let's move on. In the previous video we have seen how to create functions. This way of creating function is called function statement. But there is another way of defining functions which is called function expression. Before we actually see what the function expressions are, let's consider what expression generally means in JavaScript. For that, it will be better to compare expressions and statements. You already know what statements are. Statements are instructions to be executed by the web browser, and statement doesn't produce an immediate value. As for the expression, it produces a value and can be written wherever a value is expected. Alright. We have already learned what if statement is. It uses conditions and the block of code. It tells browser how to act in different cases and situations depending on whether condition is true or false. So if is a statement, and as we said, the statement itself doesn't produce a value. Alright. Now let's use console to demonstrate what expressions are. Write a equals to 5 plus 5. It's 10. This is an expression because it gives us value 10. Then write 10 triple equals to a. It's an expression too because it gives us true, which is a Boolean value. So again, statement is an instruction to the browser and it doesn't give us a value. An expression always produces a value. Alright. Based on that, now let's consider what function expressions are. At first, create simple function and call it add. Then place your parameters a and b. And inside curly braces, as a code block, write console.log a plus b. This is a standard function declaration and it's called function statement. So when we call it with some arguments, 5 and 10, it gives to the browser instruction to execute the code inside a function, like it was in case of if statement. And we have here 15. Alright, we can define functions in a different way. I mean to assign them to the variable as a value. It's called function expression. So create variable and call it sum. Then assign to it function with parameters a and b. And then write console.log a plus b. So here, this is a function statement. And this is function expression. You may notice that I didn't set function name for function expression. This kind of functions are called anonymous functions because they do not have names. You may also wonder how can we call the function without name, and it's possible using the variable name. So let's call this function, write sum with the arguments 10 and 15. Reload, and it's 25. Alright, there is one important difference between function expressions and function statements. Let's at first call add function before function declaration. Reload, and you see it still works. Now let's do the same for function expression. Then reload the page, and you see we have type error, which tells us that sum is not a function. For now, just remember it because the reason of that difference is an issue of hoisting. Hoisting is one of the topics regarding how JavaScript works behind the scenes, and As we said, it will be discussed in coming sections. Alright, so in this lecture we have discussed how to define functions in different ways, what is difference between function statements and function expressions. Functions are more complex things in JavaScript, but at this point, the basic knowledge regarding them is enough for you. Okay, let's go ahead.
It's time to talk about next very important aspect. I'm going to discuss what arrays are in JavaScript. Array is a special type of a variable. It doesn't store just one value, it stores a list of values. Arrays are especially helpful when you do not know how many items a list will contain, because when you create the array, you do not need to specify how many values it will hold. Alright. You create an array and give it a name just like you would do for any other variable using the var keyword, followed by the name of the array. The values are assigned to the array inside a pair of square brackets, and each value is separated by a comma. Let's write names, for example, John, then Bob, and Mary. In this case, we have an array which consists of string values, but you can pass either strings or numbers or any data type you would like. You're able to create an array with different data types simultaneously, like strings, numbers, Boolean values, even arrays, and so on. This technique of creating array is known as array literal. It's usually the preferred method for creating arrays. As you noticed, we can use array to store multiple values inside one variable. This is very convenient and helpful because it allows us to avoid creating multiple variables at the same time. Let's log it in console, write console.log array. So here we have our array. Values in an array are accessed as if they are in a numbered list. It's important to note that the numbering of this list starts at 0 and not 1. Each item in an array is automatically given a number and it's called an index. This can be used to access specific items in the array. So you see that the first item, John, has an index number 0, the second item has index 1, and etc. The same we have for the sixth member, which is itself an array, and it consists of 3 values, and they are numbered in the same way as well. You can also see here length, which is a property of an array, and it shows us the number of items array includes. As you see, the main array consists of 6 items, and the second array consists of 3 values. Length is a very useful property, and it's frequently used when we deal with arrays. Below the length property, you can see underscore underscore proto underscore underscore, but you can just ignore it because we will talk about it in coming sections. Alright, in order to access on the specific item of array, we can do it using index. So if you need to access, for example, on the first item, John, you need to write the name of the array and in the square brackets, the index number of the item. As you remember, numbering of the items always starts with 0, so John has the index number 0. Let's reload, and you see we have John. In the same way, you can access on the other items. Let's change 0 to 1, and you see we've got the second item. In order to get access on items of array which is placed inside the main array, at first we need to have access on the main array itself. So write index number 5. So we have accessed on array, but in order to access on the item of it, we need to write following. Open another square brackets and write the index of specific item. Reload, and you see 2, which is the second item of the second array. Alright, as we said, we can pass into array any kind of data type and even the functions. Let's see how to do it. But before that, let's organize our code, make some white spaces here. You may remember that JavaScript allows us to use multiple white spaces for better readability. Then write function, In this case, we don't need to assign name to the function because we can call it using variable name and proper index number. As you remember, this kind of functions are called anonymous functions because they don't have names. Let's pass here the parameter name and then inside curly braces write return hello plus name. At first, let's access on the function itself, write index number as 6, reload, and we have our function here. In order to invoke it, we just need to add parentheses after the square brackets, and also as the argument, let's pass the first item of the array, which is John, and which has the index number 0. Reload, and you see that function is called and the code is executed. We have here hello John. Alright. We can create array using another method which is called array constructor. For that we need keyword new, which is an operator. It's followed by the word array, starting with capital letter, and inside the parentheses we can pass list of values. Let's log array in console, and you see that we have here our newly created array. Alright, using first method, which was literal notation, is much better than array constructor because of less typing and also for simplicity, readability and execution speed, so I recommend always to use it. Okay, in this lecture we have considered what arrays are, how to create them with literal notation and array constructor. As for the array methods, see you in the next video.
Let's continue talking about arrays. We have several functions in JavaScript which we can use with arrays. Those functions are built-in and they are called as array methods. These methods make arrays more powerful and useful things in JavaScript. Before we actually demonstrate them, I would like to show you how we can change values dynamically in array. Let's create variable colors and insert here some colors: white, black, and red. Generally, we can change any of the values inside array. For example, if we want to change the value of the second item, which is black, we can simply access on that item and assign new value with equals operator. Write colors and indicate the index number 1 and write here the value as green. Let's log colors in console. And you see that black is removed and it's replaced with green. Alright, let's talk about methods and demonstrate how some of them work. Suppose that we want to add item to array. In this case, we can use method which is called push. It's very frequently used in JavaScript. This method adds a new element at the end of an array. So write colors.push and as an argument place here the color blue. Reload, and you see that blue color is added at the end of the array, and the length of the array has increased and became 4. Okay, as we said, push method adds the element at the end of the array, and in order to remove element from the end, we need to use another method which is called pop. So write colors.pop. Because of that, methods are functions. We always need to use parentheses with them. Reload, and you see that blue has removed. So push method has added the item and pop method has removed it. Both happened at the end of the array. Alright, if we need to remove or add the items at the beginning of the array, there are two methods for doing that, which are shift and unshift. Write colors.shift, then reload, and you see that first item is removed at the beginning of the array. Now let's add item. For that, use unshift method. Write colors.unshift, and as an argument, let's insert here the color purple. Reload, and you see that we have purple at the beginning of the array. Alright, the next and last method that we are going to demonstrate is indexOf. It's very useful and also it's frequently used. This method searches the array for the specified item and returns its position. So if we want to get the index number of red color in the array, we need to write colors.indexOf, and as an argument, let's write here red color. Reload, and we got 2 because the index number of red color is 2. Let's search another color which is not actually in the array. Change red into, for example, brown. Then reload, and you see that we have -1. It means that the color brown wasn't found in the array, and the indexOf method returned -1. Generally, when we use indexOf method and item is not found, it always returns -1. Alright, let's demonstrate how indexOf method is used with a little example. I'm going to use here if statement and check if the array includes blue color. Write the condition colors.indexOf, then insert here blue color. Triple equals to -1. So if this condition is true, then it means that blue color doesn't exist in the array, and then I'm going to add the mentioned color using push method. So write colors.push and insert here blue. Then display colors in console. Write console.log colors. Reload, and you see that blue color is added to the array because the condition in the if statement was true. This little example shows the usefulness of the indexOf method. Okay, it was array methods. There are lots of useful and helpful methods regarding arrays which you will meet throughout the course. Alright, let's move on.
As you remember, at the beginning of our course we said that almost everything is an object in JavaScript. It means that we refer one of the most important part of JavaScript. So, what is an object? Objects group together a set of variables and functions to create a model of something you would recognize from the real world. In JavaScript, objects are represented as collections of a name-value pairs. It is a simple and efficient way to collect variables and functions together. Objects can have properties and methods. Properties can be primitive data types like strings, numbers, booleans, or even arrays, an object itself. As for the methods, they are functions which are passed inside the objects in order to perform a specific task. In order to demonstrate it clearer, imagine that in real life, object can be compared to person, which has first name, last name, age, profession, height, and all of these components can describe the person like as properties of objects. In the same way, we can compare behavior of the person like speak, run, work, sing, read, to methods of the objects. As it was in case of arrays, we can create objects with different methods. I hope that you remember what I'm talking about. These two different ways are literal notation, which is commonly used, and constructor notation with keyword new. Okay, let's create object using second method, which is a constructor notation. Write variable person equals to new object. Let's see what we get in console. Write console.log person. You see that we have empty curly braces. It means that we have created an empty object because the curly braces always represent an object. In order to add the properties to that empty object, you can do it using dot. So write person dot first name equals to John. Dot is also operator like other operators, for example arithmetical, comparison, and logical that you already know. Dot is called as member access operator, and you can look at operator precedence table where you will find that. It has the highest precedence number after the grouping operator, which is parentheses, and associativity as left to right. So we can use dot operator to create, access, or dynamically change the value of the property in object. Let's add another property to our person object, but in this case use another method where we use square brackets as the operator and inside them the property which should be placed within quotes. Write person, then open square brackets, and within quotes write last name, which equals to Smith. Reload, and you see that we have added another property to our object, but in this case using different type of operator. Alright, let's look at the operator precedence table. You can find brackets after dot operator. They have the same precedence number and the same associativity. In order to output the specified property of an object, we have to write here console.log person dot first name and then console.log person. Use here different syntax, write in square brackets last name. Reload, and you see the properties in console separately. Using both operators we get same results, but using dot operator is more popular and it's commonly used. However, both methods have their advantages and disadvantages. Let's add another property to person. Let's say job. Write it in square brackets and then assign to it the value instructor. Reload, and we have another property here, job, with its value instructor. Okay, now create the variable, call it job, and assign value profession. So here brackets syntax approach allows us to use variable in order to change property name of person object. So if we write here variable name job, then we will get the new property profession, which is actually the value of variable job. Let's try to do the same with the dot operator. Create another variable and assign the value of first name, which is property of person object. Then change first name into name and see what happens. Instead of first name, we got name, which is just a new property, and also you can notice that here we have undefined, because the property first name is no longer available. So when we wrote name after dot operator, JavaScript engine didn't link it to variable name, which was created up here. So this is one of the distinctions between dot operator and brackets. Okay. If we want to change the value of property, we can do it dynamically as it was in case of arrays. Just simply write person.name equals to Bob. Reload, and you see that John is changed into Bob. Alright, let's get rid of these codes, we don't need them anymore, and create new properties. Write again person.firstname equals to John. Then person.lastname equals to Smith. As you remember, we said at the beginning of this lecture that we can add as the property an object itself. And now let's do it. At first create new object. Write person.son equals to new object. Let's run it in console and see what we have. Console.log person. So you see that there is created new empty object sun inside the person object. And in order to add new properties to it, we can use again dot operator. At first we need to access on this sun object. So write person.sun and then add new property, use again dot operator and then write property name and assign the value as Nick. Let's add another property. So write person dot sun dot age equals to 5. Reload and here we have sun object with its properties name Nick and age 5. Alright, in this video we have used object constructor notation in order to demonstrate better the things we have just discussed. In the next video you will learn about object literal notation and also the methods of objects. Let's move on. In previous video we have learned about what an object is and we have used constructor notation method to create them. But as you remember, we said that it's not kind of preferred method in real life. There is a better, more convenient and much quicker way to create objects and it's called literal notation. So as you know, when we use constructor notation, we write here variable person equals to new object. Let's run it again in console and see how it works. So we have an empty object which is represented with curly braces. And those curly braces is exactly what we need in literal notation method. Let's delete this new object and instead of it write just curly braces. Reload and you see nothing is changed because we have just created new empty object again but using a different way. Curly braces is not an operator like dot or square brackets operator. When JavaScript engine sees empty curly braces, it knows that it has to create an object. In order to add properties to person object, we have just to write property names inside curly braces, then colon, and the value. Reload. So we have first name, John. If we want to add more properties, we do it in the same way, but you need to note that we have to separate them by commas. Let's add other properties, last name, Smith, and age 27. Alright, for better readability, like it was in case of arrays, let's organize our code. It's more convenient, better to read and preferred way when we work with objects. In case of constructor method, to get the same result, we needed to write variable person1 equals to new object. Then for adding each property, we needed to write every time person1 dot first name equals to Bob. Then person1 dot last name equals to Doe, and eventually the result is same. So you can see how convenient is literal notation method. The code is clearer, it's easy to read and we type less. But regardless of that, you are able to add properties and methods using dot or brackets operator in case of literal notation method as well. So I recommend to use literal notation. Alright, let's remove this code and now create inside person another object. We can do it in the exact same way. We need to use curly braces. So write daughter with its properties, name as Mary, and age 5. Reload, and again we have a new object inside person object. To access on the values of the properties is the same as it was in constructor notation method. So let's get the value from daughter object. Let's duplicate console.log in order to avoid typing the same each time, and add daughter.name. Reload, and we have Mary. Alright, Let's talk about functions in object, which are called methods. In order to pass the function inside an object, at first we have to write method name, and we have to do it in the same way as it was for the properties. So write my function, then assign to it function. We always use here anonymous functions, which is a function without name. We use anonymous functions here because we can call them using method names. Let's see it. Write console.log hello world, and then in order to call this method, write person dot my function. Because of that, we have console.log inside the function. We do not need to write it again when we call this function. Reload the page, and here we have hello world. Alright, let's make our example more complex and use the properties inside the function. But before that, let's pass some parameters here. For example, daughter name, then father name, and daughter age. And then write in console daughter name plus is a daughter of, then place here second parameter father name, then again some text, and she is, then we need here daughter age, and finally years old. Alright, now pass the arguments here and use the properties of person object. As daughter name, we should write here person dot daughter dot name. Then as the father name, write person dot first name. And as for the age of daughter, let's write person dot daughter dot age. Reload, and we have Mary is a daughter of John, and she is 5 years old. Alright, we can pass new object as the argument on the fly. I mean when we call the function. For that we need only one parameter, because we are going to use object as an argument. Let's place here as a parameter par. Then create an object on the fly. Write daughter name as Jesse, then father name Michael, and as daughter age, write here 5. As we already know, to get the values of the properties from the object, we need to use dot operator. So write to all the properties par dot. So again, we have passed a single parameter inside our method. Then we passed on the fly an object as an argument and used its property values. Reload, and we have Jessie is a daughter of Michael and she is 5 years old. Alright, you already know much about objects, but because of that, JavaScript is an object-based language. We need to go deeper and learn advanced things regarding objects, and you will do it throughout the course. But for now, for the basic level, it's really excellent. Let's go ahead.
Alright, let's discuss another very important thing in JavaScript and also in all programming languages. It's time to talk about loops. If you want to run the same code over and over again, each time with a different value, then you have to use loops. Looping means repeating a block of code when a condition is true. So loops check condition. Okay, let's actually see what I'm talking about. To demonstrate how powerful tool the loop is, let's create an array and place inside it some names, John, Nick, then Bob, Michael, and Mary. Now suppose that we want to output in console each item of array at the same time. So what can we do? We have to access on each item and then log them in console separately, like this. Console.log array with index number 0. Let's duplicate it 4 times and change the index numbers. Reload, and you see that we have the names from array, the result what we wanted to get. How do you think, is that the best way? Of course not, because we had to type a lot. We use specified index number for each item in order to access on them. Here we had just only 5 items and was a bit easy to do that, but imagine that sometimes we may have dozens of them. Then it will be crazy, right? So we need something else, and it's loop. To avoid using such inconvenient way and also much typing, we can simply use for loop. At first, let's demonstrate how we have to write it syntactically. We need to use keyword for followed by parentheses, in which we have to write some expressions and conditions. First of all, we need to create variable which will be initializer or counter. In most cases, the name of the variable is I, which stands for initializer. So if we want to output names from array starting with John, then we need to assign to the variable I the value 0. Because as you know, John is the first item of array and its index number is 0. After the end of the first statement, we need to place semicolon, which is followed by the condition. So array consists of 5 items. Because of that, the last item, Mary, has the index number 4. Then we need as a condition to write I is less than 5. And the last statement, we need to write I++. It's actually an arithmetical operator and it's called increment operator. And it's the same as I equals to I plus 1. Using increment operator, after each step, the value is increased by 1. Alright, the last we have to do is to run this in console, write console.log array and in square brackets write the variable I. Reload, and you see that we have again the names from array. For loop gave us the same result. So I believe you guessed that it's more powerful, dynamic and flexible way. Okay, let's see deeper what has happened here and how for loop actually works in general. When for loop is on global level, it means that it's not inside a function. Then JavaScript engine immediately executes the code. We don't need to call it, as it was in case of functions. Each step in loop, I mean the whole cycle, is called as an iteration. At first, JavaScript engine sees that variable I equals to 0. Then it checks the condition. Because of that 0 is less than 5, the condition is true and it prints in console first item from array, John. Before the first iteration is ended, I is updated to 1 using increment ++ operator. So update of variable I from 0 to 1 happens exactly after the executing of the code block inside curly braces. In this case, JavaScript engine prints the value John, which has the index number 0. After that starts second iteration, and as we said, I is already updated to 1. 1 is less than 5. The condition is again true, and JavaScript engine prints the item of array which has the index number 1. And it's Nick. Then again it goes back to I++, updates I and increases it to 2. Then starts third iteration, and in the same way the third item Bob is printed. So loop is continued while the condition becomes false. So when I becomes 5, the condition is false and the loop stops execution. You may wonder why JavaScript engine doesn't go back to first expression where variable I equals 0 after each iteration. If it acts like this, then after each iteration, I would be 0 again, and we would get infinitely the first item of array John, and that would crash the browser. So that's why the engine executes this expression only once at the beginning of the loop, and also that's the reason why it's called initialization. Alright, imagine that we don't know how many items the array has, and also we want to output all of them. So what can we do? The solution is to use the property of array, which I hope you remember from the previous videos, and it's called length, which you see here. We have 5 items, and therefore length of the array is 5. So we can use it instead of 5, reload, and you see that we have same output. It's better to use length property because it will work whether you know or not how many items the array has. Alright, let's make our example a bit complex, and also I would like to show you some features of the statements that we can use with loops. Get rid of this line and use if statement. Suppose that Bob is my brother and I want to find it in array names using loop and then output it. Write if statement inside the loop and insert the following condition: array I triple equals to Bob. So this condition will be true when loop reaches the third iteration, and when the condition is true, let's print out the following. Write console.log array I plus is my brother. Reload, and we have Bob is my brother. In order to output other items as well, we need to write outside if statement console.log array I. So here we have all existing items. Now suppose that we want to stop the loop when the condition is true inside if statement. For that we can use the break statement. So when JavaScript engine sees the break statement, it stops looping, and it doesn't matter whether the condition is true or false inside for loop. Reload, and you see the first 2 items of the array, then the output Bob is my brother, and after it the for loop is stopped. Suppose that we want to output all the items in array except Bob. For that we can use another statement which is called continue. So let's write continue, reload, and we have all the items except Bob. Alright, let's see what continue exactly does. The continue statement breaks one iteration in the loop if a specified condition occurs, and continues with the next iteration in the loop. So in this case, when the condition inside if statement is true, then it executes this line of code. Then JavaScript engine is going to output Bob, but it sees the continue statement. Therefore it breaks the current iteration and moves directly to the next iteration and prints Michael and then Mary. So this line of code is executed because it's written before continue statement. If we place continue before that line, then it won't be executed. And you see that Bob is my brother no longer appears. Alright, in this lecture we have learned what for loop is and how it works. Let's move on to the next video. In previous video we have talked about and described how for loop works. And now it's time to consider other types of loops, which are while and do while. While loop does actually almost the same work as for loop. The main difference between them is in syntax. As you remember, in case of for loop we had 3 statements in parentheses: initialization, condition and increment or decrement. As for the while loop, the counter is created outside it. Then we need to write keyword while. Inside parentheses, we have only the condition. And inside curly braces, we have a block of code where we can put the increment or decrement of the counter. So let's write console.log I and then I++. Reload the page, and we have here numbers from 0 to 10, because in while loop we had condition I is less than or equal to 10. Okay, as you see, I++ is written after the console, but if we place it before console, then we will get the numbers from 1 to 11. It seems a little bit strange, so let me explain what has happened here. As you know, in case of for loop, the value of counter was updated after the execution of the code block. In this case, we see that I is set as 0. It means that we have 0 is less than or equal to 10 in condition. Then JavaScript engine continues reading codes line by line. It sees I++ and updates its value from 0 to 1. And that's the reason why we got 1 as the first number instead of 0. And also, that's why the result ends with 11. When I becomes 10, then the condition is true, but because of that we have I++ before console.log, then the value of I becomes 11 for the last iteration. Make sense? Alright. This will make us unexpected results when we use while loop with arrays in practice. Let's see what I mean. Create array of colors and insert here some colors: white, red, then green and blue, and use while loop to output the items of the array. Set the counter as 0, then create while with the condition I is less than colors.length, and inside the curly braces run in console colors I and then I++. Reload, and you see we have our colors in order. But if we place I++ before console.log, then you see that the first item is skipped, and after the last item we have undefined. The reason is same. For the last iteration I became 4, and we know that item with index number 4 doesn't exist in the array, and that's why we got undefined. Alright, the next that I want to show you is do while loop. The do while loop is like the while loop, but it executes the block of code once before checking if the condition is true or false. If it's true, then do while loop will continue looping as long as the condition is true. At first we write the keyword do, then inside the curly braces we need to write block of code. Write again console.log colors I, and then the increment I++. After that, we have to write the keyword while with its condition. Let's reload the page, and again we have colors from the array. As we said, in case of for and while loops, the execution of block of code would not start and execute if the conditions are false. But in case of do while loop, it doesn't matter whether condition is true or false, the first iteration will be always executed. So if we make here condition false and write I is greater than colors.length, then we will get only the first item from the array, which is white. So remember that in case of the while loop, at first the code is executed and then the condition is checked. If it's true, the loop is continuing to work accordingly before the condition becomes false. This is the main difference between while and do while loops. Alright, so in this lecture we have learned what while and do while loops are and how they work. Let's move on.
In this video we are going to talk about dates in JavaScript. It's a very important aspect in web development, especially when your websites or web applications have the relationship with the users. I mean that sometimes you may need to get date of the user registration, or you may need to check the time of the payment and many others. In all of these cases, you need to know how to deal with dates. Alright. In order to work with the dates, you have to create an instance of the date object. You can then specify the time and date that you want it to. The syntax is the same as it's for creating any object with a constructor notation. Let's create variable and call it date and assign to it date object. By default, when you create a date object, it will hold today's date and the current time. So let's log in console the variable date. Then reload and let's see what we have here. So the first is the day of the week. Today we have Wednesday. Then it's followed by the date. Today is the 24th of January 2018. Then we have the current time, which is followed by the time zone. When you use date object without setting any specific date of time, JavaScript engine always gives you current date and time. So if you reload the page again, the time will be updated. If you look at the seconds, you will notice that it's changing on every refresh. Okay. You need to note that the current date and time is determined by the computer's clock. If the user is in a different time zone than you, their day must start earlier or later than yours. Also, if the internal clock on their computer has the wrong date or time, the date object could reflect this by holding the wrong date. If we change the time zone from computer settings, let's set something else here, then it will be updated accordingly. You can manually set the different date and the time. There are several formats and ways of doing that. I'm going to show you one of them, which is a new date string format. You need to write inside the parentheses, for example, January 20, then the year 2020, and then the time, for example, 10:14. Reload, and you see that current date and time is changed. It's the fixed time because if we refresh again, it won't be changed. Alright. Date object has its built-in methods in JavaScript. If you take a look on the screen, you will see commonly used date get methods, which let you to get a part of the date separately. If you use, for example, getDate method, you will get the day of the month as a number from 1 to 31. As for the getDay method, it gives you the week day as a number from 0 to 6. This range indicates the index numbers of the weekdays. You know that there are 7 days in a week, therefore you have index numbers from 0 to 6. You can use these index numbers to get the actual weekday names. As usually, the first day of the week has the index number 0, which is Sunday. Monday has 1, and so on. In the same way works the getMonth method, which is also based on index numbers. We have 12 months, and therefore we have index numbers from 0 to 11. You see here that there are other methods as well, like getFullYear, getHours, getMilliseconds, getMinutes, and getSeconds. Okay. There is another group of date object methods, and it's called setDate methods. Set methods are used for setting a part of date, so you can set the day of the month. You can also change current year, we can set month, hour, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. Alright, let's see some examples regarding date methods. Get rid of this date string and use current date. Reload. So here we have current date. In order to get the part of a date, for example year, we need to use get full year method. So create variable year and assign to it date.get full year. Then log it in console. Reload, and you see that we got current year from the date separately. In the same way, you can get other parts from date object. For example, let's get month and use here get month method. Create variable month and assign to it date.get month. Then log it in console as well. Reload. We have now January, which is the first month of the year. Because of that, the index numbers of the months are 0 based. We got the index number 0. Okay, let's use the set methods, which are used for setting the parts of the dates, and change, for example, the current year and month. Write date.set full year and indicate here 1990. Then set the month, write date.set month and write here 11. So you see that the current year is changed from 2018 into 1990, and in the same way January is changed into December. Alright, there is one thing to note. If you create the variable and assign to it set method, write for example variable x and then log it in console, then you will get a large number. Let me explain what is that. This number specifies the number of milliseconds since January the 1st of 1970. So if you count milliseconds from January 1st, 1970, you will get approximately the same number because it's changing on every refresh. It's not very important issue at this point, and I'm not going to waste time on that. Working with date objects is a very simple. You can test other get and set methods on your own. Alright, let's move on to the next video, in which we're going to build a little digital clock project. So let's go ahead.